Let me tell you something about parking garages and shared buildings. Nobody ever thinks about them until they become a problem. You sign your lease, you get your keys, you get a little piece of paper that says Unit 4B, Garage Space 7, and you think that's the end of it. You think wrong. I moved into the Briarwood Commons complex on a Tuesday in March, one of those early spring days, where the air still bites, but the sun is trying its best. It was a modest place, nothing fancy. 12 units spread across 2 buildings, a shared courtyard with a sad little fountain that only worked in July, and a row of 8 garage spaces tucked underneath Building A. The garages weren't much to look at. Concrete floor, metal roll-up doors, a single fluorescent tube that buzzed like it was angry about its life choices. But in a neighborhood where street parking meant circling the block 4 times and then walking 200 yards in the rain, those garages were gold. My lease was specific. I have the document right here in a folder, actually, because I'm the kind of person who keeps things. Paragraph 14, subsection C. Tenant is assigned exclusive use of Garage Space 7 for the duration of the lease term. Exclusive use, not shared use, not sometimes use, not use it when nobody else wants it use. Exclusive. I want to be clear about something before this story goes any further. I am not a confrontational person. I don't go looking for trouble. I pay my rent on time. I take my recycling out on the right day. I hold the lobby door for people carrying groceries. I am, by every reasonable measure, a decent neighbor. I say this not because I need you to like me, but because you need to understand that what happened next was not something I started. It was something I finished. For the first 5 months, Garage Space 7 was exactly what it should have been. Mine. I parked my car there every evening after work. I kept a small metal shelf along the back wall with a toolbox, a case of motor oil, and a plastic bin of emergency supplies, because my mother raised me to be prepared. I even swept the floor once a month, which I realize makes me sound like a particular kind of person, and I accept that. The complex was quiet. Most of the tenants were working professionals, a few retirees, a young couple in 2A who argued about dishes but were otherwise harmless. The garage spaces were assigned to tenants in Building A since the garages were physically part of that structure. Building B tenants had a small open lot around the back. It wasn't covered, and it wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. That was the arrangement. That was what everyone agreed to when they signed their leases. I knew most of my neighbors by face and first name. There was Gerald in 3A who always smelled like pipe tobacco and nodded at you like you just said something wise. There was Priya in 1B who worked night shifts and moved through the hallways like a ghost. There was Tom and Maria on the second floor who hosted a 4th of July barbecue that was genuinely lovely. And then there was Unit 6B. Unit 6B was empty when I moved in. It stayed empty through spring and most of summer. The property manager mentioned once that they were having trouble filling it because the previous tenant had left the place in rough shape. New carpet, new paint, new appliances. It took time. I remember the exact day the moving truck showed up because it blocked the garage entrance for 3 hours and I had to park on the street. September 14th. I watched from my kitchen window as box after box went up the stairs. I didn't think much of it. New neighbor. Fresh start. Maybe they come to the barbecue next year. I had no idea that the person unpacking those boxes was about to make my life very interesting for a very long time. The first time it happened, I told myself it was an honest mistake. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the water treatment plant on a Tuesday evening in March, and there was a white Nissan Rogue sitting in my garage spot like it had every right to be there. Engine off, doors locked, no note on the windshield, no hazard lights blinking, nothing that said sorry or temporary, or I'll move it in 5 minutes. I didn't even know whose car it was yet. I parked on the street that night, which meant walking an extra block and a half in the kind of cold rain that finds the gap between your collar and your neck. I figured someone had a guest over. Someone got confused, and it would sort itself out by morning. By morning, the Nissan was gone. My spot was empty. I pulled in, went to work, and forgot about it. Then it happened again on Thursday. Same car, same spot, same locked doors and absent driver. This time I noticed the bumper sticker, a cartoon cat giving a thumbs up over the words, "Rescue Mom." and a parking permit from the Meadowbrook Terrace condominiums hanging from the rearview mirror. Our complex. So not a guest, a resident. I parked on the street again. I mentioned it to Darnell, my neighbor in Unit 7, while we were both checking our mailboxes the next morning. White Rogue? That's the new lady in 14, he said, sorting through his envelopes without looking up. Moved in about 3 weeks ago. Karen something. Kowalski, maybe. She's got her own spot on the east side, but I guess she doesn't like the walk. Didn't like the walk. That was the whole reason. Her assigned spot was maybe 200 feet farther from her front door than mine was from hers, and apparently that was enough for her to decide my garage space was community property. I saw her for the first time 2 days later. She was coming out of her unit carrying a yoga mat and a smoothie in one of those cups with the domed lid, and I caught her just as she was heading toward the parking area. Medium height, blonde hair pulled back tight, sunglasses pushed up on her forehead even though it was overcast. She had the posture of someone who had never once been told no in a way that stuck. I introduced myself, told her my name, told her my unit number, kept my voice the way I keep it when I'm explaining a valve pressure reading to a new hire. Calm, clear, no room for confusion. Hey, I think there might be some mix-up with the parking. The garage spot you've been using is actually assigned to my unit. Number 11. It's in my lease and everything. She looked at me the way you'd look at a waiter who brought you the wrong drink. Not angry, just mildly inconvenienced by my existence. Oh, she said, I didn't think anyone was using it. It was always empty when I got home, because I work nights sometimes, but it's my spot. She took a sip of her smoothie. Well, I'm sure we can figure something out. The east lot is so far and I have bad knees. I didn't ask about the yoga mat and the bad knees. I just said I'd appreciate it if she used her own assigned space going forward. And she said, in a way that meant absolutely nothing. And that was the end of our first conversation. The Nissan was in my spot again the next evening, and the evening after that, and 4 out of the next 7 days. Each time I parked on the street, each time I told myself I was being patient. Each time I walked that block and a half in whatever weather March felt like throwing at me, and reminded myself that I was a reasonable person, dealing with someone who simply hadn't gotten the message yet. But she had gotten the message. That was the thing I was slow to accept. She had gotten it clearly, politely, and completely. She just didn't care. I tried the nice way first. I want that on the record. The morning after I found Brenda's white Lexus sitting in my garage for the 3rd time that week, I walked over to her unit with a coffee in one hand and what I thought was a perfectly reasonable attitude. Her front door had one of those decorative wreaths that change with the season, except hers was still Christmas even though it was March, which tells you something about the kind of person we're dealing with. She answered on the second knock. Full makeup at 7:30 in the morning, which I respected, even if nothing else about her earned that word. Hey, Brenda, I said. Quick thing, that garage space you've been parking in, that's actually my assigned spot. Unit 14. It's in my lease and everything. She looked at me, the way you'd look at a child who just explained that the moon is made of cheese. Patient, amused, completely unmoved. Oh, sweetie, she said. I've been parking there since before you moved in. Talk to the HOA if you have a problem. And she closed the door. Not slammed it, just closed it like the conversation had reached its natural end, and I was the one who didn't realize it. So I talked to the HOA. I called the management office and spoke to a woman named Dina, who sounded like she'd been on hold with her own soul for about 15 years. I explained the situation. Assigned spot. Other person, parking there. Lease is clear. She said she'd send a courtesy notice. A week later, nothing changed. Brenda's Lexus was in my spot 4 out of 7 days. I was parking on the street 2 blocks away and walking past her unit every single time, which I'm sure she enjoyed. I called Dina again. She said the courtesy notice had been sent. I asked what happens next. She said they could send another courtesy notice. I asked what happens after that. She said they could escalate to a formal warning. I asked how long that takes. She said 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. I tried Brenda one more time. Caught her at the mailboxes on a Saturday afternoon. I kept my voice level. I had my lease printed out in a folder because I am not above visual aids when someone is pretending not to understand property rights. Brenda, I just want to show you real quick. Right here, Unit 14, Garage Space C11. That's mine. It's assigned. She barely glanced at the paper. I don't know what to tell you, hon. I've had that space for years. Maybe they made a mistake on your lease. They didn't make a mistake. Well, I'm not moving my car. She said it the way someone orders a salad. No heat, no defensiveness. Just a fact about the world as she understood it, where wanting something long enough turned it into yours. I tried one more time through the HOA portal, submitting a formal written complaint with photos, timestamps, and a copy of my lease agreement. I got an automated reply saying my ticket had been received and would be reviewed in the order it was submitted. 3 weeks later, I got an email saying the matter had been addressed and to let them know if the issue continued. The issue continued. Brenda's Lexus was in my spot the very next morning, engine still ticking when I walked past it. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. The kind that comes when you realize the system everyone tells you to trust has no interest in doing anything except generating paperwork. Brenda wasn't going to stop because she was asked. The HOA wasn't going to make her stop because that would require effort. The only person who was going to fix this was me, and I was going to fix it in a way that was so clean, so perfectly within my rights, that not a single person could say I'd done anything wrong. I just needed to be patient. And I am a very patient person. Now here's where I need you to understand something about me. I'm not a hothead. I don't key cars. I don't leave nasty notes with cutout magazine letters like some kind of parking dispute serial killer. What I do is read. And when I'm angry enough, I read very carefully. After that last conversation with Karen where she told me to take it up with management and then closed her door in my face, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and I pulled up every single document I had. The lease, the HOA bylaws, the community parking addendum from 2019 that nobody ever reads, the amended garage assignment sheet that the property manager had emailed out when unit transfers happened 2 years back. I read all of it, every word, twice. And what I found was beautiful. See, the HOA bylaws had a provision, Section 4.7.2, that specifically addressed unauthorized use of assigned parking structures. Not just spots, structures. My garage was a deeded structure tied to my unit. It wasn't communal. It wasn't shared. It wasn't first come, first served. It was mine the way my front door was mine. And Section 4.7.2 said that any owner had the right to secure their assigned structure against unauthorized access using any commercially available locking mechanism, provided it didn't alter the external facade of the building. Any commercially available locking mechanism. I drove to the hardware store that Saturday morning, took my time, walked the aisles like a man browsing for pleasure, which honestly I was. I picked up a heavy-duty steel bollard post, the kind that drops into a concrete sleeve and locks with a key, removable, legal, and rated for blocking vehicles up to 6,000 pounds. Cost me about $140. Best money I ever spent in my life. Then I called the property manager, not to ask permission, to notify. There's a difference and it matters. I said I would be installing a removable bollard at the entrance to my deeded garage per Section 4.7.2 of the community bylaws. I said I wanted this documented. He sounded tired, the way property managers always sound, and said he'd make a note of it. I asked him to confirm by email. He did, 14 minutes later. I still have that email. Now here's the part where timing mattered. Karen had a pattern. She parked in my garage every weekday morning around 7:15 when she left for her early shift. She'd pull in, lock up, walk to the bus stop at the corner, and take the 40 bus downtown. Her own assigned spot sat empty all day because she said my garage was closer to the bus stop, 60 feet closer. That was her whole justification for months of theft. I waited until a Thursday evening, waited until she'd already parked her silver Nissan Rogue inside my garage for the night, which she'd started doing more boldly since our last conversation. I think she thought she'd won. I think she thought I'd given up. At about 9:30, when the street was quiet and the lights in her unit were off, I walked out to my garage with a drill, the concrete sleeve, the bollard, and a bag of quickset anchoring cement. The installation took about 40 minutes. I set the bollard right at the mouth of the garage entrance, dropped it into the sleeve, locked it with the key, and tested it with my weight. That thing wasn't going anywhere without the key or a blowtorch. Then I went inside, poured myself a second cup of coffee because I'd earned it, and set my alarm for 6:45. I wanted to be awake for the morning. I want to be clear about something. I didn't trap her car. She parked her car in my garage without my permission. I secured my property as I was legally entitled to do. What happened to her car as a result of her own choices was, and I say this with absolute peace in my heart, not my problem. I slept like a baby that night. I woke up that Tuesday to the sound of a car horn. Not a quick tap, not a polite little chirp. A full, sustained, leaning on the steering wheel blast that went on for maybe 15 seconds, stopped, then started again. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. 6:42 in the morning. I didn't get up right away. I poured my coffee first. Took my time with the cream. Stood at the kitchen window and watched the steam curl off the mug while the horn went off a third time, then a fourth. By the fifth blast, I could hear her voice too, though I couldn't make out the words. Didn't need to. The pitch told me everything. See, here's what had happened. The evening before, I'd had my new bollard installed. Retractable, keyed, bolted into the concrete right at the mouth of my garage bay with the permit number stamped on the base plate. The installer finished around 4 in the afternoon, tested it twice, handed me both keys, and told me to have a good night. I raised the bollard, locked it in the upright position, and went inside to make dinner. Karen's Lexus was already in my spot. Had been since that morning, when she'd pulled in while I was at work. Same as she'd done for weeks. The difference now was that the bollard stood between her car and the only way out. She must not have noticed it when she came home that night. Or maybe she came home late and it was dark and she walked right past it. Either way, Tuesday morning at 6:42 she noticed. I took my coffee to the living room, sat in the chair by the front window. From there I could see the garage entrance at an angle, just enough to watch without being obvious about it. Karen was standing next to the bollard in her work clothes, a gray blazer, and those black pants she always wore on Tuesdays. She had her phone in one hand and her car keys in the other, and she was looking at the bollard like it had personally insulted her mother. She kicked it. I want to be clear about that. She hauled back and kicked a steel bollard with what looked like a fairly nice pair of flats. Then she said something I definitely could make out that time, even through the window glass. She called someone. I watched her pace back and forth while she talked, gesturing with her free hand, pointing at the bollard, pointing at my unit, pointing at the sky for some reason. The call lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then she made another call, then a third. Between calls, she tried pulling the bollard. She tried wiggling it. She got down on her knees and looked at the base plate where it met the concrete. And I imagine that's when she saw the permit number and the installation company's tag. Around 7:30, she knocked on my door. I answered on the third knock, coffee still in hand. She was composed. I'll give her that. Whatever she'd been screaming at the bollard and into her phone, she'd packed it down by the time she got to my doorstep. Her voice was tight but controlled. To move that thing so I can get my car to move that thing so I can get my car out. I took a sip of coffee. I told her I wasn't going to do that. I told her the bollard was installed with full approval from the property management company and the HOA, that I had the permits and the paperwork, and that my garage was my garage. I told her she was welcome to contact the HOA board if she had concerns, and I gave her the office number even though I knew she already had it. She stared at me for a long time. I could see her calculating, running through her options, trying to find the angle. But there wasn't one. Her car was in my space, and the only exit was locked, and the lock was legal, and the key was in my pocket. She turned around and walked to the bus stop at the end of the block. I finished my coffee. It was a good morning. The first call came on a Tuesday morning, 6:15, before I'd even finished my coffee. I knew it was Karen because nobody else calls a landline anymore and nobody else would let it ring 11 times like the phone owed them something. I let it go to the machine. Her voice came through tight and clipped, the way people sound when they're trying very hard to seem reasonable while being anything but. This is completely unacceptable. You need to move whatever you've put in front of that garage immediately. I have places to be. Call me back. I took a sip of coffee. It was good coffee. I'd switched to a new blend the week before, something with a little chocolate in the finish. I sat there and enjoyed it. By Thursday, she'd left 4 more messages, each one a little less composed than the last. The 5th one had a wobble in it. Not sadness exactly, more like the sound of someone who has never been told no, discovering that the word exists and applies to them personally. She cornered me in the shared hallway that Saturday. I was carrying groceries, both hands full, which I think she timed on purpose because it meant I couldn't easily walk away. "You can't do that," she said. "I've called the management company." "That's your right," I said. "They said the garage is yours." "It is." "But my car is in there." "It is." She stared at me like I was supposed to fill in the rest of the conversation for her, like I was supposed to offer the solution she wanted just because she stood there long enough. I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone who has spent a lifetime having other people smooth things over, and now the smoothing has stopped, and the surface is rough and unfamiliar. "I need my car," she said. "I understand that. You parked it in my garage without permission. I've secured my property. You're welcome to contact a tow company to retrieve your vehicle, but they'll need to coordinate with me since it's my space." Her face went through about 4 colors. She called me a word I won't repeat because my mother raised me better than to put it in a story, and she went back to her unit and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the fire extinguisher off the wall mount in the corridor. The next week was what I'd call the escalation period. She taped a handwritten note to my door Monday. She slid a printed letter under my door Wednesday, this one citing laws she'd clearly found on the internet and half understood. Something about unlawful imprisonment of property. I kept every single piece of paper, put them in a manila folder I'd labeled Karen in blue pen, which I'll admit gave me a small and petty satisfaction. She told other neighbors I was holding her car hostage. Most of them already knew the history. Dave from Unit 9 told me later that when she tried to recruit him to her cause, he just said, "That's his garage, Karen," and went back to watering his tomatoes. She threatened to call a lawyer. She threatened to call the news. She threatened to call her cousin, who she said was a police officer in another state, as if jurisdiction was a suggestion and not a rule. 2 weeks in, she left a note that just said, "This isn't over," in capital letters with 3 underlines. I added it to the folder. 3 weeks in, she stopped leaving notes. The hallway went quiet. No more door slams. No more messages on the machine. I'd lived next to Karen long enough to know that silence from her wasn't peace. It was planning. But here's the thing about planning. It only works if you have something to plan with, and Karen had already used every card she had. She just didn't know yet that the deck was empty. I poured myself another cup of that good coffee and waited. The call came on a Tuesday morning, which felt right somehow. Tuesdays have always struck me as the most honest day of the week. No pretension, no fanfare, just the quiet machinery of the world turning over and doing what it's supposed to do. Officer Reyes was the one who showed up. Not the first time I'd seen him at the complex. Karen had called the non-emergency line 3 separate times during those weeks. Each call a little more shrill than the last, if you believe the dispatcher's weary tone when she'd phone me back with a courtesy heads up. But this was the first time anyone official actually knocked on my door with a clipboard and what looked like a formal complaint. I invited him in, offered coffee. He accepted, which I took as a good sign. People don't drink your coffee if they're about to cite you. He explained that a formal complaint had been filed alleging unlawful imprisonment of property. Those were the words on the form. Unlawful imprisonment of property. I let that phrase sit in the air for a moment because it deserved to be appreciated. Karen had apparently gone to the station in person, demanded to speak with the supervisor, and insisted that what I had done constituted theft, kidnapping of her vehicle, and, this was my favorite, emotional terrorism. Officer Reyes read that last one off the form with the careful blankness of a man who had been trained not to editorialize. I told him I understood the seriousness of a formal complaint and that I wanted to cooperate fully. Then I pulled out the folder, the same folder I'd been building since before any of this started, Deed to the Garage Unit, HOA Bylaws, with the relevant parking assignment sections highlighted. The certified letter I'd sent Karen 11 weeks prior. The 3 follow-up emails, all read receipted. Photographs time-stamped, showing her vehicle in my assigned space on 14 separate occasions. The formal complaint I had filed with the HOA board, along with their written response acknowledging my ownership and advising me that I was within my rights to secure my property as I saw fit. Officer Reyes went through every page. He didn't rush. He asked a couple of clarifying questions. When had I installed the new lock? Had I provided notice? Was there any verbal agreement that might have superseded the written assignment? I answered each one plainly. No verbal agreement. Written notice provided. Lock installed on my own property during business hours with a licensed locksmith, whose receipt I also had in the folder. He closed it and set it on the kitchen table and drank the rest of his coffee. Then he told me something I will never forget. He said that in 11 years of responding to neighbor disputes, this was the most organized file since he had ever seen a civilian put together, and that if more people handled conflicts this way, he'd have been able to retire 3 years ago. He told me the complaint would be noted as unfounded. He told me Karen would be informed in writing. He told me that if she continued to escalate, I could pursue a harassment claim, and that his report would support it. Before he left, he paused at the door and looked back at me with an expression I can only describe as professional respect, wearing a thin disguise of amusement. "The emotional terrorism thing," he said. "That's a new one for me." I told him it was a new one for me too. He left. I washed both coffee cups and put them back in the cabinet. I sat down at the kitchen table where the folder still lay open, and I looked at it for a long time. Not with triumph exactly, more with the quiet satisfaction of a person who had done every single thing right and had simply waited for the world to confirm it. The world, it turned out, was not in any particular hurry, but it got there. It always does, if you've done the work and kept the receipts. Karen's written notification arrived at her door 2 days later. The morning Karen's car finally left my garage was a Tuesday. I know because Tuesdays are when the recycling truck comes through, and I was dragging my bin to the curb when I saw the tow truck backing down the alley. Not the kind the city sends, the kind you pay for yourself when you've run out of options and swallowed enough pride to open your wallet. She didn't come outside. I know because I watched. Not proudly, not with my chest puffed out, but I watched because I'd earned the right to see the end of this thing. The driver hooked up her sedan in about 12 minutes. Professional. Quick. No drama. He pulled it out of my garage and onto the street, and Karen's daughter came out to move it into their actual driveway, which had been empty this entire time. That part still gets me. The whole time, her own driveway sat there like a patient dog waiting to be noticed. I closed my garage door that afternoon for the first time in weeks without checking over my shoulder, clicked to the remote from inside my kitchen and listened to it rattle down, and the sound was so ordinary, it almost made me laugh. That's what all of this had been about. The ordinary right to use my own property without someone else deciding it belonged to them. Now here's the thing people always want to know. Did Karen apologize? Did she come over with a plate of cookies and a sheepish grin and say she was sorry for the trouble? No, she did not. And I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. In these stories, people want the villain to break down, to admit they were wrong, to have some moment of transformation where they see the error of their ways. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter and, in its own way, more satisfying. She stopped. That's it. She just stopped. No more parking in my spot. No more notes on my door. No more loud conversations on her porch about what a terrible neighbor I was. The complaints to the HOA dried up. The threats about lawyers evaporated like morning fog. She still lives 3 doors down. We still see each other at the mailbox. She doesn't wave, and I don't force it. There's a nod sometimes, the kind you give someone you've reached an unspoken agreement with. The agreement is simple. She stays in her lane, I stay in mine. My garage is mine. I've thought a lot about what made this work, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I never yelled. I never threatened. I never did a single thing that wasn't within my rights as the owner of that property. Every step I took was documented, legal, and boring. That's the secret nobody wants to hear. The most powerful thing you can do when someone is acting unreasonable is be so reasonable it becomes airtight. You don't need to match their energy. You need to make their energy irrelevant. My buddy Dave asked me once if I felt bad about her car being stuck in there for weeks. I told him the truth. I felt bad for about 10 minutes on the third day, and then I remembered every conversation where I'd asked politely and been told I was the problem. After that, the guilt went away, and it stayed away. The garage is back to being a garage now. My car fits in it. My workbench is along the back wall. There's a mini fridge in the corner that I keep stocked with cold drinks for when I'm out there tinkering on weekends. It's nothing special. That's the whole point. It was never special. It was just mine. And if there's a lesson in any of this, it's one that Karen learned the hard way and I learned the patient way. You can take what isn't yours for a while, sometimes a long while, but eventually the person you took it from is going to stop asking nicely and start using the system. And the system, slow and frustrating as it is, tends to side with the person holding the deed. Entitlement has an expiration date. It just doesn't print one on the label.